Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I know I haven't made any videos recently, but I recently reached out to Larry Johnson to chat with him a bit about the Nicaraguan Civil War, and he said yes. So we're here and we're going to learn about some of our country's history. How's it going, Larry?
Hi there. I am well. Thanks for the invite.
Oh,
Uh,
thank you so much for joining it. It means a lot, and I really respect what you do, but I don't want to waste too much time about
okay.
these things.
Well,
So
I'm flattered by that.
what I'm going to ask you about, I refer to as the Nicaraguan Civil War. Um, in the United States, it's often referred to as the Iran-Contra scandal or affair. From my perspective, this is a disgusting use of propaganda because we caused an artificial civil war where Nicaraguan people killed Nicaraguan people, and we financed it and made it all happen and destroyed all of our values in the process. So calling it Iran-Contra, for me, it just seems like a distraction from what the real
Yeah.
suffering was that was caused, right? Why don't we start off by can you kind of summarize what was happening when the Nicaraguan Revolution happened, the second one? So right before Reagan like got militarily involved, right? The Sandinistas overthrew the Somocistas, right?
Right.
So can you inform our audience like what was going on in that era, and then we can move forward from there.
Well, this was sort of, I'll call it the high point of the Cold War. So, and I can't recall off the top of my head what year the Somoza got dumped.
That's
Was
fine.
it 1980,
The
80?
events are more important.
But during this, you had a variety of events taking place around the world that all fed into the narrative of the Soviet Union trying to spread communism and conquer the world. So you had the Islamic Revolution in Iran. And it was it was an organic, popular uprising that
The
tossed out the
overthrowing of the
Shah.
Shah.
Yeah. So that took place in 1979. Uh, the U.S. under Jimmy Carter basically provoked the Russians into invading Afghanistan, then the Soviets into invading Afghanistan, because we were actually supporting Islamic
Mujahideen.
extremists that were attacking the government, and the government was, unstable. So the Soviets intervened to try to stabilize the government, but it was portrayed in the United States as part of the Soviet expansionism. And then the just because the Soviets and Cubans supported, they supported the Sandinistas, it was again portrayed as if this was all being manipulated by out exterior forces, that there was no organic internal reason for these people to want to get rid of Somoza. Now, I had lived in Honduras in 1978. I was running a rural community development project. My wife is a nurse. She set up 3 rural clinics, and you know the social structures throughout Central America at that time were quite oppressive, and the it was, you could be poor, and no matter how hard you worked, you couldn't work your way up into a better lifestyle.
Low
Uh,
social mobility.
yeah, you had to go to the United States, which many Salvadorans did at the time, and Guatemalans. But there were significant differences between those countries back then. A good friend of mine who was he was instrumental in helping get the word out about the massacres that took place in Guatemala in the later in the 1980s. He says, if you'll get killed in Honduras if the person gets drunk, and they're drunk, and they could kill you. In Salvador, they kill you, but they'll have a reason. You did something, you were associated with the wrong person. But he said in Guatemala, they'll kill you for just standing there with teeth in your mouth. So there were significant, even though it's all Central Americans, and so they all speak Spanish
Different countries are
ostensibly.
different.
They're very different. And in Guatemala in particular, with the treatment of the indigenes, the Mayan people, uh, they were treated as subhuman, Untermensch. I never was in Nicaragua, so I never had a chance to really get the flavor there. Except it struck me more like Honduras. I call it because it sits between Honduras and Costa Rica. It's sort of a mix of those two. Costa Rica was the most, let's call it, modern and progressive of all the countries in Central America back then. So Nicaragua had the misfortune of winding up as the centerpiece in the U.S. war to combat international communism as perceived through the lens of fighting the Soviets. And it was all called Cold War. Within, so, the CIA got involved. They were told to arm and equip. And there were two factions, or, well, three factions. So you had a group of the former Somocistas, the National Guard officers. Yeah, they were receiving money, and they were trying to fight. There were actually a number of campesinos who had felt that they'd had their land taken or whatever, and so there was a group of them. Then you had the folks down south in Costa Rica, Aiden Pastora and his crew. They ended up being running cocaine, doing some cocaine movement into the United States back during that period. So the CIA for the CIA, it was a big deal. The careers were being made there. For example, the head of the Central American Task Force was at one point when I was there from, let's see, 85, 86, going to 87, Alan Fires. Now, Alan, he came out of the Middle East Division. And so they always viewed Latin America as such a backwater, look at all the nice little brown people, that they're not very smart.
I still get that impression.
Yeah, there's an arrogance, a Yankee arrogance about it. And what was hilarious is, we treated, when I say we, the United States, treated the Hondurans like they were, the house servants. And meanwhile, the Hondurans were running circles around us. We thought we had them under control, and they were
a weapon to be used.
Yeah, they were controlling us. But they convinced themselves that the Sandinistas were the spread of Soviet communism, and that we had to stop it. And so the top priorities were the war in Afghanistan, that covert action, and then the covert action there in Central America, because it spilled over. You also had the guerrilla movement, the insurgent movements in Salvador, the FMLN. And again, they're fighting against a pretty corrupt military establishment. And because I saw a lot of this firsthand at the time. The people, the people were not. Not everybody had the same right. There were no equal rights. There were unequal rights. So this whole Central American Task Force was coordinating the war with the Sandinistas, the war in Salvador, the war in Guatemala, because there was also insurgent movements up there, or guerrilla movements, or liberation movement. Call them what you want.
Yeah, liberation fronts.
The only sort of, if you want to call it La Isla Pacifica, the peaceful island, was Honduras, because Honduras didn't have that internal civil strife. So Honduras became sort of the aircraft carrier, or it was where the bases were set up, and the CIA had a base down in what was called the Bocay, down on the southern border. And so then they got back into this back and forth of the Congress would cut off the funding, and then the CIA would go looking for funding overseas. This is where Ollie North got involved. In fact, here, let me show you something. Stand by. Okay.
The pilot.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
Can you tell
Yeah,
what it is?
focus.
Can you tell what it is?
So,
Daniel Ortega,
yeah.
Miguel de Soto, el foreign minister, Muammar Gaddafi.
Ah, that's Gaddafi. Okay, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So
But
this,
what's the structure behind them? Is it an aircraft or a building?
uh, no, they were on a ship. They were on a ship or at an airfield.
Ah, so they're in at the sea.
I forget where they were precisely, but so I showed up at the Central American Task Force in March of 1986, and one of the first jobs I had was the CIA printed up 538 copies of this photo. Why do you think we printed up 538 copies? What would that be used for?
Well, there were probably like 538 members of something you needed to show them to.
Okay, members of what?
Uh, I would guess like Congress, but I don't know.
No, you're exactly right. 100 for the senators, 400, and we got 435 representatives plus 3 extras. So, and I hand carried those photographs downtown to Ollie North. Handed him, actually gave him to his assistant, Fawn Hall, because they were saying the message that was being put out was the Sandinistas are in solidarity with Muammar Gaddafi. And this was back when we were labeling Gaddafi a major terrorist.
Yeah, so the photo was the proof.
Yeah, but exactly. But we'd cut off the title, the subtitle, because what they were actually doing, they're simply shielding their eyes from the sun.
No.
Yeah, yeah. So
Oh my,
yeah,
I wouldn't have guessed that. I literally thought they were like this. It looks like
yeah.
the Trump fist.
Solidarity, man. We're the no. There was they're looking at the sun, going like, you know.
That is a good metaphor. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can see
So,
why you
but
shared that.
that's an idea. So, um, they I don't recall the specific dates in which like the Boland Amendment went into effect and cut off the funding. Um, I do know that by somewhere over the summer of of '86, the funding had basically been turned back on, and Allen Fires had started up the resupply operations for the contras, and um, that was being handled on an island off the coast of Honduras called Swan Island. And you know, I mean, there's some stories. So you'd think that if you're going to run a covert air operation to do aerial resupply for the contras, the you would have like one basic plane. So you'd have 5 of the same kind of plane. Oh no, that's not what Fires did. He got 5 different aircraft. Well, from just a maintenance standpoint, that creates an incredible nightmare. But shortly after they established that base, they had a new plane they called a Casa 212 that was going to be used, and they had to test its navigation because they had some unconventional navigation systems, and so they were going to use a beacon for if you flew at night to find your way back to the island. There'd be a beacon on the island. And so these 2 pilots, they were called Rhodesians. You know, they were mercenaries that the CIA had hired out of Africa. They took off late in the day to test the beacon system. Well, the guy who was the chief of that base, I learned later, he was a notorious alcoholic. But because he was buddies with Allen Fires, he was put in charge of this base. Well, he took the beacon with him into a concrete bunker and drank enough scotch that he passed out.
So the signal couldn't get out.
So here those guys, it's now dark. They're turning around. They're trying to find the island. Can't find the island. Can't get the signal. They end up dumping this brand new multi-million-dollar airplane into the Caribbean. They managed to get out into a raft. They float around for a couple of days. They're picked up by a Soviet trawler. You know, so, but it was out of that island that Eugene Hassenfuss flew. And I guess Let's see. I started in the Central American. I spent my first year in what was called a career trainee program, which is where during that time I worked on the Central American Task Force on the operations side. But then my job as an analyst started in September of '86, Central American branch. And I think it was in October, like I'd been there only like a month, that Eugene Hassenfuss gets shot down and flying out of Swan Island. And that started what is known as the whole Iran, making the Iran-Contra affair.
Yes, that was the photo that proved it to the public,
Yes,
basically.
yeah,
Proved they were involved.
yeah.
The American public.
So while all of this is going on, then you had the mess in the Middle East, which was also involved with this. So here we get into just, how damn evil the United States is, in my view. In 1980, when Jimmy Carter was still around, he signed off on a finding that authorized the CIA to work with the government of Iraq and to use Iraq as a way to apply pressure on Iran, because the Iranian students had taken a number of U.S. embassy personnel hostage in October of '79 or November, because the United States was allowing the Shah of Iran, who they had disposed of or overthrown, allowed him to come to the United States. So that created a problem. So we started backing the government of Iraq, a guy named Saddam Hussein. Don't know if you've ever heard of him, but so
executed for killing 140 Shia.
Oh, at least. Yeah.
Go on.
Well, so yeah, actually, you have to jump back to 1975, because in 1975, this Christian group of Christians, the Phalangists in Lebanon, massacred a group of Shia Muslims on a bus, and that started the Lebanese Civil War. So that Lebanese Civil War started in 1975. It continued up into it didn't end until 1990. So 15-year war. And if you've ever seen the movie Spy Game with Robert Redford and Brad Pitt, when they're in Beirut during that period and battles are raging and Shia and Sunni and Christians are killing each other. In 1982, Hezbollah emerges, because it's backed and supported by Iran, who's supporting the Shia. The United States begins fighting. Israel invades southern Lebanon to aid the Christians, and then ends up allowing the Christians to carry out the Sabra Shatila refugee camp massacres. Just thousands of Shia women, children, elderly were murdered. So that gets, Hezbollah then it starts to organize and emerge as a factor. Then you get the attack on the Marine barracks in October, so-called Marine barracks in October of '83. Again, a response for U.S. involvement in attacks on Shia. Then '84, '85, you've got the bombing of the U.S. Embassy twice, one in '84, next in '85. And then you start getting the kidnapping of Americans. So, some of these are being kidnapped by groups that are loyal to Bashar al-Assad in Syria, some that are connected with the Hezbollah, some are just, criminal gangs seeing a chance to make some money.
Advantage of the situation. Yeah.
So that's where we start dealing. So during this entire, I forgot to mention, starting in August of '83, Iraq starts using chemical weapons against Iran.
Yeah,
and
they get the stuff for that?
Us. The United States provided all those chemicals. And so here's the Iraqis using chemical weapons against Iran. Plus, we were providing the intelligence from at least 81 up through '86. The CIA had the lead in sharing the intelligence with, carrying the intelligence to the Iraqi general staff. But then it switched. It became it was under the Defense Intelligence Agency. And the man who hand carried all that intelligence was a good friend of mine. He's now deceased. Pat Lang was his name. So anyway, again, this all has context to Central America, because now they've got all these hostages that are that have been taken, and they're trying to figure out how to get Iran to help free the hostages. And Iran is they're wanting some surface-to-air missiles to use against the Iraqis, who we're funding and helping. So, Ollie North is involved with trying to broker this whole complex deal. Plus, they set up an independent. I guess it went from 84 to the summer of 86. Independent financing to finance the Contras. Some of it was with drug money. Some of it was with money from overseas. So it was all this convoluted mess. I've never really sat down to try to trace out all the different connections, but it was in the course of this that all of a sudden, when Hasselfuss went down, and then the revelations that they'd had the secret funding of the Iranians and the secret funding for the Contras, and yet I call it particularly the campesino element within the Contras. They were, there were some at the time they legitimately opposed. They didn't like the Sandinistas, and these were not conservative radicals. I mean, these are poor guys, but they got deceived by the United States, and so I remember it was like January of '87, and so now all the aid was flowing. And the Contras were supposed to be surging into northern Nicaragua to carry the battle to the Sandinistas. And they weren't fighting. And so I used because I had friends on the other side, on the operations side, and say, okay, what's going on? And it turned out that the politicians were pressing the CIA. We need to have the White House pressing. We've got to have military action. But the Contras, those campesinos, did not have weapons yet. There had been a screw up in the logistics. So the orders came down from the CIA. I don't know if it was Vince Shields or a couple of other guys that were the chief of Latin American division on the outside. But they said, stop feeding them, cut off all food, tell them they only get food if they cross into Nicaragua. So here these campesinos without food, without guns, were being forced across the border into Nicaragua, and they were getting ambushed. They're getting shot up by the Sandinistas. Now there was one CIA officer, a paramilitary guy, and when he saw, because he lived with these people, and he you develop friendships, and when he
see the people's faces,
when he saw that, he commandeered a helicopter and began flying. He was ordered not to do this, but he got a helicopter. He kept flying back and forth across the border to pick up the wounded to bring him back to Honduras. I don't know how many lives he saved, but after
what
that,
was his name? I never heard about that.
Yeah, I forget his name offhand. I'd have to go back and check my notes.
I like learning about the little moments where individual Americans did the right thing.
Yeah, he did the right thing, and he got fired for it.
Yeah, that's what happens.
But as he said, his attitude was "fuck it." I'm not going to sit by and let them get shot. So again, you see on the cynical side how they were used just as pawns. There was no genuine concern about them as human beings. And again, my attitudes, and I was, from an analytical standpoint, we tried to apply the same standard. As an example, that if you had an insurgent group, whether it was the FMLN or the Contras, you ask the question, are they attacking military targets or are they attacking civilian infrastructure targets? And if their tendency is to do more civilian infrastructure than military, that lets you know that they're not as, basically they're not as competent or good as they think they are. And that the attack on civilian infrastructure, if that's the primary trend, that's a sign of weakness. Oh, no. We were instructed that any attack by the Contras was a sign of a great advancement, and they're charging forward. Um, and there was pressure also about language. I sat in what's called a warning meeting where the National Intelligence Officer for Latin America, at the time a guy named Bob Vickers, would bring in the analysts. So, again, the focus was Nicaragua, Central America, and Peru. You had Sendero Luminoso showing up down there, I think, at the time. And so I was doing my brief, and I said something about the Contras, and he said, "Stop." I said, "What?" "You can't call them Contras. You must call them the Nicaraguan Democratic Resistance." And I went, "Reagan calls them Contras." He goes, "Yeah, but he's the president." So, I mean, you're in trouble where you start playing stupid word games like that. So the war continued, but the Contras were not making really any significant advances at all, and it got to the point. One of the guys on the operation side who ran sort of their military dealt with the whole military activities was a fellow named John Armstrong. Now, John was a West Point grad, I think like class of 67, 68. And he'd been a really good analyst on North Korea with the Army and U.S. Army intelligence. But he'd now made his way out to CIA. And we kept getting these reports, so the human reports would be released showing the battle, the battle activity supposedly in Nicaragua, but we weren't seeing any corroborating evidence. And finally, in a discussion with him, we learned he would write out what are called operational orders. So these would be orders that you would send to a company commander or a platoon leader. This is your mission. This is your target. This is what you're going to attack. This is this is the kind of weapons you need to carry. This is your objective. Spell it all out. Well, what he would do is he would send those out, and then he would issue them as intelligence reports as if they had actually happened, whether they happened or not.
Just reword them.
Yeah, no, he'd just issue them.
Sounds like he always got everything done.
Huh. Yeah, and so that's why we saw we were not seeing activity corresponding with what was actually happening on the ground. And then I guess it was March of '88, and Armstrong, myself, and a Nicaraguan military analyst is named John Hiddle, along with the Nicaraguan branch chief, a guy named Dwayne Dara. We were down on Capitol Hill briefing because it looked like the Sandinistas were building forces up on the southern border of Honduras, out around this area called the Bocay. It's when you look at a map of Honduras, it's a little part that looks like India sticking, but a little, very tiny India on the southern border, jetting into Nicaragua. And as we were briefing about, were the Sandinistas going to invade? What were the Hondurans going to do? How would they respond? And man, at the midst of the meeting, someone breaks in. There's a phone call from headquarters, and I guess Dwayne Dara stepped out to take it. And he comes back in and says, "I have to report. The Sandinistas have attacked. They've overrun the Contra base in the Bocay. It's being described like a massacre, like the Alamo." As we got up to go back to headquarters to see what the hell was going on, and the Republicans on it were just outraged. This was seen as Sandinista aggression. That's how it was being portrayed, as the Sandinistas have invaded. And when we got into the van, Armstrong turns to Hiddle and me and goes, "You analists," a way of calling us assholes. "You analists, this is your fault. You have allowed this to happen." And it was like, okay. So we get back to headquarters, and I said, "Okay, let me see the intelligence." Well, what it was a piece of signal intelligence collected by NSA, and it was reporting that there had been contact between a Contra patrol and some Sandinistas 15 kilometers from the base. So not only was the base not being overrun, but they were 15 kilometers out in triple canopy jungle. You know, the friggin' Sandinistas could have sent a division of soldiers in there, and they'd be lost in the jungle. So right away, we knew that this was bullshit. This was being spun up, presented as something that wasn't true. And so I was friends with the assistant secretary for Latin America at the time at the State Department, was Elliot Abrams, you know, the hunchback of Washington. He is hunchback. He's got scoliosis. Nasty little man. And his assistant, a guy named Steve, called me and said, okay, got to give me the dump now, because he's writing the speech for the president of the United States. He's going to go on television and say, we told you so, I told you so. And he's going to mobilize the 82nd Airborne, and they're going to, we're going to attack the Sandinistas. And I said, whoa, Steve. I said, let me read to you what the intelligence actually says. And he goes, oh my God, I got to stop Elliot. So,
did they actually stop it?
No, they stopped some of it. But what happened was the 82nd, I think it was the 82nd Airborne. They got alerted at Pope Airfield. That time is Pope Air Force Base in North Carolina. I can't remember, it was either them or the 101st out of Georgia. Anyway, they got activated, flew down to Honduras, jumped in, but there was nothing going on out in the Bocai, and it was more like it ended up being like a training exercise for them. But you know, that again, that's where I saw firsthand how intelligence was manipulated, misrepresented, and all for a political agenda. And this was, the war was not going well for the Contras. The Sandinistas were actually asking for help because the Contras had started using some man pads, man portable, shoulder fired.
Those were much rarer back then, right? Like now that it's common, but back then,
it was real well.
And
they restricted them. They didn't give them stingers. Stingers were the state of the art back then. We'd give the stingers to the Mujahideen, but we would only give the Contras red ice. They were not considered less effective. But I was involved with translating. We got one source that defected with documents from the Sandinistas to the then Soviets, asking for help and how to defeat helicopter tactics to defeat these man pads. This gets us into like 88, and at that time there's a new special envoy for the Central American peace process, Morris Busby, and Buzz was working on trying to, see if they could get a negotiated settlement. Costa Rica was working hard. So they were looking for a diplomatic settlement to all of this, because there wasn't going to be a military solution. And against that whole...
People were suffering.
Yeah, and against that whole...
met people from that war, they tell me about it. I just go out into the streets, look them in the eye, and they tell me, their cousin died.
Yeah.
It was horrible.
Yeah,
horrible.
No, it was completely unnecessary. And then again, against this backdrop, you've got the hostage crisis for Americans that had been taken in Lebanon. It had increased. It was like in 85 that Rich Higgins, a U.S. Marine that was detailed as part of a UN peacekeeping force, he was kidnapped and murdered. William Buckley, the CIA chief of station, he had been kidnapped and executed. So there was, we really had a thing, we were fighting against Hezbollah, and we saw it as fighting against Iran, failing to understand that, again, we were the outsiders invading in a foreign country, not them. Fighting
or creating?
Well, both. So the actual war effort with is the fallout from Iran-Contra, because the movement of money between Iran, foreign governments, and the movement of weapons to to the Iranians to help them fight the Iraqis, who we were funding. We were the ones sponsoring that war. It's just absurd. That all got exposed, and that they had set up these outside systems for funding the contras that were basically allowed people who were in government to profit. They profited on the side. It was a very messy time, and it didn't really it didn't settle. In fact, the focus then moved south, because I left the Central American branch in into September of 1989. So during those 9 months that in 1989, the effort to try to overthrow Manuel Noriega got kicked into high gear. Now, Noriega had been a CIA asset, and for some reason we got pissed off at him and decided, he wasn't going.
In Panama, right?
Yeah, Panama.
Yeah.
Manuel Noriega. So the CIA was engaged in a series of covert activities to provoke the Panamanians into doing something that we would then be able to justify doing an invasion. And they kept refusing to take the bait over and over and over. Huh? So I then moved, when I left CIA in into September. I walked out of the CIA headquarters on a Friday, and then entered on duty at State Department on a Monday in the Office of Counterterrorism. And then it was in December of that year that the U.S. invaded Panama. And so the whole focus of the war that had been going on between Nicaragua and the Contras with Honduras and Costa Rica, they sort of backed out, and it just died out. It was,
so I don't. Distracted.
Yeah, well, wars. Well, on top of it, the Soviets had withdrawn from Afghanistan, so that program with the Mujahideen had gone away, and yet we had all these trained radical Islamists, and then by 1990, we are so mercurial. We had spent 9 years supporting Saddam Hussein, giving him money, giving him chemical weapons. We'd holler later about the weapons of mass destruction. I mean, for fuck's sake, we gave it to him. He didn't create those on his own. We did. And
correct me if I'm wrong, but Iran never used chemical weapons.
Not only did it never use them, they never even created them. They didn't have them because it was considered haram, a sin. So again, one more lie of the United States about Iran being this terrorist state, where the ones who are providing chemical weapons to other countries, that's us, that's not them. So by this point, when I was the Honduran analyst in 1986, 87, and then my duties expanded. I became the regional analyst for Central America, 88, 89. I was writing for the Presidential Daily Brief at least three times a week. So the average analyst is lucky to get one article, say, every 3 weeks in the Presidential Daily Brief. I was writing 2 to 3 times a week. So it was
very often.
Yeah. So it was, I had one of the hot accounts. They did not, but by 89, going to 90, it became a backwater. It was no longer, we were no longer obsessed with defeating the Sandinistas because the Soviet Union collapsed. So with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, all of the fears of, quote, Soviet expansion and global communism just disappeared. That debate was over. And so then we turned into what I call the period of, I don't know if it's benign neglect or total neglect. We no longer cared what was going on in Nicaragua, Honduras, Salvador, Guatemala.
I pray for the people here. It stays that way.
Yeah.
I wish Americans would do nothing more. We cause so much harm to people, and I've seen the domestic abuse and the problems here, and it's so sad hearing Americans judge the Latin American people when we waged war on them. We made so many silent generations of parents who like stayed inside because they might be shot in the street and
Yeah.
like they
Yeah.
had to raise kids in impossible circumstances. Of course, their children are traumatized.
Yeah.
Of course, we did this to them, right? And for me, that's so clear. But I'm treated quite badly when I talk this way to Americans, and that's why I just left. I
Yeah. Treated badly by Americans, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
you're
Yeah.
treated amazing by Nicaraguan people as a member of the country that did the things to them. It
Oh no, yeah. There's they're very. I mean, the while there are distinct cultures, as we were talking before we went on air, between Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, they have distinct cultures, but there's just a hospitality and a graciousness and a friendliness that with the people that even the very poor are very generous. And one of the things I learned in Honduras, the guy that was sort of my mentor back then, his name was Ed Guy, just a guy. He was Ed Guy. Uh, that when you were offered something to eat or drink, you had to you had to accept it. Otherwise, you would risk offending. That you were unwilling to accept their gift, and people who were very very poor who didn't have I mean, literally lived on dirt floors with bamboo walls, would give you a gift. And I'm wealthy
they're
compared to what they were. So
humans.
yeah,
They see another person, and even though they might not have little, sometimes they don't even necessarily realize they have little. I'm not saying everyone's like that, but
yeah,
one of
yeah.
the
But
reasons I stay here is people treat people. It's not like this for everyone. Nicaraguans can treat Nicaraguan people really badly.
oh yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but, but
There's
that being said, that people here have this ability to look you in the eye and listen to you. And in our culture, we just fight. We argue. We don't listen to each other. We don't even value debate anymore. So
yeah, that's
that's
tough.
and 1 second here. I just want to make sure because, all right, you have to be gone by 15 minutes, right?
Yeah, about yeah, I've been 10 minutes tops.
10
Uh,
minutes. Okay,
ten
cool.
minutes. Yeah.
So I want to make sure that now we've covered a lot of the history. That was incredible. Thank you so much for summarizing all of that. It was really, really, for me, a big thing I always wondered was, did we arm the Mujahideen
Yes.
before they invaded? So you just basically confirmed
Well,
that,
I mean, look, um, the Chechen first Chechen war started about 92 or 93. Uh, those were those were
that
some of
was
the
the
guys.
ripple of
Those are guys
the
we had
Afghan
armed.
war.
Those are
That was
guys we had
the
armed in Afghanistan. Yeah.
the secondary
And then
effect.
then the second Chechen war, which was again with these radical Sunni extremists. Um, that started on August 9th, 1999, and that continued for about 10 years. It was a bloody civil war, funded in part by CIA and with operatives that the CIA had worked with in Afghanistan. So, again, we've been, I maintain the United States is without a doubt the biggest sponsor of terrorism in the world. No other country has done more than we have. So,
So now that you say this, and by the way, I completely agree. I've seen so much suffering and the way we treat our children in the United States, the way we treat drug addiction, the way we treat younger people, the way we just don't give a shit about poor people or what we do to humans all over the world. I agree. But so what can be done as an American? Because what I always encounter is that most Americans, and maybe this is true for all people, I just mostly know about Americans, they're so distracted and kind of unhappy with life already that they simply don't have, one, the time, and two, the emotional fortitude to learn about what we really do. And therefore, they end up defending us. And this is why, again, I wish we would do nothing. Even from my perspective, the best thing an American do is actually nothing. Not defend your country whenever, you just assume the Chinese are worse, the Russians are worse because we're better than them. That's the kind of shit that enables all these horrible things to happen. We need to
Yeah.
stop defending each other. But what do you think can be done about these things? Because from my perspective, I thought this was all done, right? But now I see, like, no, we still do the same stuff. We're just worse at it. Like,
Yeah.
we're not good at covering our ass anymore. So it's more obvious.
Yeah.
But
It's
like, it didn't end, did it?
no, it's gonna take. We're gonna have to go through a collapse like the Soviets experienced in 1991, a complete economic crisis uh, to, if you will, humble us as a country, to show us that we do actually have limits to our power, and that we have actually there's accountability for what we do. Uh, we've gotten away with fighting war after war after war with hardly suffering any losses, at all. Even
Yeah,
Vietnam.
ever since the Civil War, right? I mean, even the
Yeah,
World Wars, we lost
yeah,
nothing compared to the Russians and
yeah.
these other.
Russia's
We
Russia.
say we saved everyone. It's like it was a
If you look
team effort.
if you look at the what happened to Russia and China, they suffered roughly 70% of the casualties. Those two countries alone, 70% of the casualties of World War II.
China and Manchuria?
No, China and Russia.
No, I mean China. Their casualties. Was it in Manchuria that
It
most
was
of that
throughout. It was
happened?
throughout. It was throughout China. It was
I
Manchuria. It
don't
was
know much about that
yeah.
era, so
Well, I know that's the average American. We're taught about World War II. It's John Wayne, Sands of Iwo Jima, those movies. And the fact of the matter is, the Chinese army fought 70% of the Japanese army. We only battled 30% on the Pacific Islands. So it was the Chinese actually fought the bulk of the Japanese army. They kept the Japanese army tied down in China, in part because China is such a vast area. But it was when the Soviets finally entered the war in August of 1945 and defeated. They quickly engaged in Manchuria, one of the Japanese armies, and they killed like 84,000 in one encounter. That's finally what compelled the Japanese to surrender to end the war. But it is we don't understand the history of the wars, and as you correctly note, uh, yeah, we lost. I think the total deaths for World War II are estimated around 470,000. What's really fascinating is you can't really get a good solid number, but it looks like about 180,000 died in the European and North African theaters. Italy, Sicily, Normandy, and 110,000 died in the Pacific campaign. So that brings us up to like 200 or 390, and then there was another 113,000 that died in accidents, sickness, not in combat, but just they were wearing a uniform when some accident befell them. That got us to 470,000. Well, Battle of Stalingrad, the Soviets lost twice that many, over 900,000 soldiers in just one battle that lasted 6 months. So,
we are so propagandized that when you
yeah,
tell that to an American, they immediately will tell you that that's just what Russians do. They slaughter their own people, they send
yeah,
them off to die. And I'm not saying that didn't happen. I'm not saying Stalin was a
right,
good dude. I'm just saying it's sad how we are tricked into these things. And
yeah,
so what do you think like average people can do? Because I see what you do and the people and Judging Freedom and Dialogue Works and all these shows.
yeah.
Like you guys are making it cool to start coming out against these things. And it's so I feel so happy for you all because 30, 40 years ago, if you were an ex-government worker and you started talking,
You didn't have a platform to do this.
exactly, yeah, yeah.
30 years ago, you had to get on television. So, I started actually going on. My first CNN appearance was 32 years ago, August 1994, the capture of Carlos the Jackal. But no, it's just, people get educated. They need to get educated. And then they need to start challenging their elected officials. But again, I think it's going to be some exterior crisis is going to force us to change,
Or
to
maybe
at
it's the
least
cost of oil
confront it.
quadruples.
Yeah. So with that, I'm sorry to have to bail out on you
No,
here,
no,
but
this is perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. And everyone, this has been Larry Johnson. Make sure to check him out on YouTube. He's all over YouTube talking to loads of people about these things. So he's doing the Lord's work, so to speak.
hey, listen, thanks so much, and send me the link. I'll be happy to post it at sonar21.com.
Awesome, I will. Thanks,
All
Larry.
right.
See you
Hey,
around.
it's a pleasure. Bye bye.
Bye. Wow. Holy smokes. So I haven't been able to look at chat or even verify that this live stream was actually recording properly and everything. I'm going to deal with that later. I recorded it as well, so I can just repost it if it didn't work and it didn't go live. But I know that, like, yeah, this is completely out of the blue. I haven't made any videos on the Nicaragua channel, and that's actually because of things related to this. So instead of just ending the call now, I'm going to, well, instead of ending this video, this live stream, I will just talk a bit to those of you who are still watching. Because as you can tell, like, well, I haven't been making content, and I was willing to make content, right? To talk to somebody about these kinds of things. And I think this is a good chance for me to get into why I haven't been making content about Nicaragua. And ultimately, my life here changed completely. I'm able to live a good life in accordance with my values. Does that make sense? So I purchase food from people whose lives are improved because I pay them more than normal for the food. I live off of something called pinolillo, a local Nicaraguan food. And so I have a supplier for it that's a family that makes it for me. And I'm able to ensure that they have, like, doesn't sound like much, but like 50 to $60 of extra income every month. And what I found in Nicaragua is that it's so much easier to live in a way where you are actually useful to the people around you, especially as a foreigner who has some income coming in, right? So I was deluded, okay? It's true that I live this way and I do what I can to assist local people, right? I'm not with a foreigner, I'm with a local, and there's lots of problems in the family and everything. But I understand the origin of those problems, and I see that it is my people and my culture that created those very problems. So I would be foolish to turn my back to those things. That would just, in my head, make me no longer live in accordance with my values. Makes sense? Makes sense? And I understand that in the world things are intense and everything, but I'll just give you a word of advice if you're still listening. All that really matters in this life is that you, as an individual or a person, whoever you are listening, that you are able to live your life in accordance with your particular values. Okay? What works for another person might not work for you. But if you live your life doing things that go against your values, you will suffer. And understand that most people in our society are, in fact, suffering because they've been put into a position where they have to forsake their own values on a regular basis. They don't even comprehend that there is another way to live, right? And for most people, what are you going to do? I got lucky. You know, the pandemic happened and I ended up with somebody. And it was like, all right, I could go back to my meaningless life in the United States where people are, are financing these things, paying attention to the system, working all the time constantly for companies that don't give a shit about them, that will abuse them, that won't give them effective medical leave or retirement, and we allow our culture as Americans, we allow this to happen. We allow ourselves to live this way where we just get abused. We allow ourselves to be neglected. And I know that people don't think that that's true, think that there's no choice. I beg to differ. But I've found that when you start to challenge what you believe, and when you start to see what your values really are, you can start to understand why you suffer. Because if you are suffering, it is because you are going against your values. And the reason I bring this up is because I've found that no matter how hard life is, no matter who you know that's sick or dying, or if you yourself are dying, none of that really matters if you live in accordance with your values. You don't suffer. The reason we suffer is because deep down, as Americans, we know that we hurt people. We can't escape it. And we often have been raised in a world where we weren't given enough support, especially younger generations growing up. It's a different world for young American people compared to their parents. You can't just get a college degree and be okay anymore. It's irrelevant. You can get a college degree, but unless it's in a very relevant field that is long lasting and not getting taken over by AI or something, you're not going to have a stable life. And so what I'm trying to get at here is that ultimately, what really matters, and the reason that I stopped making the Nicaragua videos, and also the reason that I wanted to like take advantage of this opportunity to talk to Larry, is because I've seen what my country does and what my people do. And I know that this is an unpopular opinion, okay? But from my perspective, it's not our politicians' fault. It's not the deep state's fault. It's not the CIA's fault. It's our fault. All of those are products of us. We create them. We perpetuate these lies to our children that we are the hero, that we saved the world. We still tell our children that dropping atomic bombs on Japan ended World War II. Think about that. We look at one of the most horrific acts of violence ever committed, not the most, one of them, and we say without a doubt it was worth it. What message does that send our children? It tells them that violence is justifiable, right? And this is the unfortunate part of American culture. We justify violence, even though it seems like we don't. The reality is our effect is one that justifies violence and creates it. And all of these things may be sad, but by learning about them and coming to accept them, then you are no longer surprised when new conflicts occur or horrible things happen because you understand how these things are produced in the first place. So you don't get tricked into going along with the conflict and telling your friends and your family that we are defending anybody, because we're not. And this is what I hope that this conversation with Larry has helped to shed some light on. We play both sides. We make martyrs. We pay people to kill our friends. And then we use that to get what we want. And then we F off and we go home and we abandon everything. This is what we do. It's what we have done. And I ask you to consider these things because the truth is they never ended. If you think that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is the Russians just wanting to expand and take over, I'm sorry for you because that means that you have faith in the United States, and that faith will be crushed. It will be questioned because the truth is so much worse than what people realize. I'm not saying I know the truth, but I've seen what we do, and I know that a good people would not do these things. We would just leave, do nothing. It would be so much better. Okay? So the reason I'm articulating this is because ultimately what I found myself in a position in here in Nicaragua is I was making content to encourage people to come to the country, to encourage foreigners to come to the country, imagining they might help locals. And don't get me wrong, it does happen sometimes. But for the most part, that doesn't happen. most foreigners who come to Nicaragua are old, creepy men who do bad things to women and don't have any respect for them, go out into the streets looking for prostitutes, this kind of behavior. I'm not saying everyone is, but that's absolutely what happens. People come to Nicaragua, foreigners come to Nicaragua, and they take advantage of young people. They take advantage of young women. And I find it absolutely disgusting. So for me, I no longer felt right making content, not because I think that'll happen, ultimately, yeah, I may have brought someone into the country and then they do something bad, but also someone good came, right? But ultimately, the point is that it's all about the foreigners. And even the notion of an expat, what the hell is that? I'm an immigrant. I am, I am, I am not an expat. I am an immigrant, just like any other country or any other citizen who leaves their country and goes to live in another country. You're an immigrant. We made a whole new word for ourselves because we're not immigrants. We're expatriates, This is the kind of nonsense, this double standard of life, right? And what I'm getting at is that I found myself in a position where I became aware that all I'm really doing is making things that benefit foreigners. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to improve my own well-being enough that I can protect and aid the Nicaraguan people in my life. I'm not saying you can't save people. And if you, as a Westerner, think that you can help somebody, you have to understand that most of the time we try and help, we fuck everything up. So if you really want to help someone, you have to look them in the eye and ask them what they need. You don't know. If you're willing to do this, if you're willing to give people the time of day to speak with them, whether they're, a worker walking through the street looking through trash, whether they're a wealthy person, whatever. These are the things that you have to be willing to do. And so for me, that's been why I don't make the Nicaragua content anymore, and why I don't know if I'll be in a position to do so. Because what I want to do is I need to empower my own financial position and my own skill sets so that I can provide skill development resources for Nicaraguan people. I have seen that the thing that Nicaraguans need most is work. Absolutely. It's not about some oppressive government or these kind of things. It is jobs. That's what they need. That's all they really need. Nicaraguans leave the country because they can't find work, not because of some huge massacre where loads of people died, not because you don't have freedoms, right? I can tell you, living here, at least as a foreigner, I have more freedoms than I had in my own country, especially now in the modern era. I can't speak this way without getting in trouble in the United States. You know, there are reasons that people are so frustrated about these things, right? And now you understand, you have some context, and yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna make any videos on this channel or anything. I just figured, now I got a chance to actually speak with someone I respect a lot. I really admire the Americans who were involved with these things and have the courage to talk about them, and that's what I needed. So like that's why like from my perspective, people like Larry, they're literally doing what is the best possible thing for the American people because the American people need to wake up. If we don't wake up, our elite wealthy class will consume us because we are losing the wealth that we acquired from the world wars, and there's no way to get it back. Absolutely no way. So we are about to enter or have already entered an incredibly traumatizing reality for the American people. But the problem is that we have created a society that is completely delusional and dysfunctional and doesn't know anything about these events. So in the reality right now, you have a lot of distractions, people thinking it's about this or that. We're financing a genocide. We are financing the genocide of the Palestinian people. And not only that, but the actual war of aggression is not waged by Russia against Ukraine. It is waged by Israel against Lebanon. against Syria, against Iran, against Gaza. Our allies are the ones who wage these illegal wars of aggression that we raised entire generations of children on saying are the bad thing. And if you caught earlier on in our discussion with Larry Johnson, he mentioned Saddam Hussein. And you may have been confused by my comment because I said, oh, yeah, he was executed for killing 140 Shia, right? And so obviously Larry was like, I mean, he's killed way more than that, right? I don't think Larry got my point. But basically, the technical reason that Saddam Hussein was executed once he was captured was because of a massacre of Shia people, where I think it was like 148 Shia were killed. Okay? That was the technical reason that was used to justify his execution. Okay, so he was put to death, and this was the reason that was given. All right? Know that as an American, we opened the war on Iran by killing 150 Shia, more than 150, the vast majority of which were under the age of 12. If you think that this was some accident, that this was some mistake, you are in for a rude awakening because we have entered a new era. We are not the good guys anymore. It's debatable whether we ever were. And if you want to be happy in your life as an American, you have to come to understand these things. Because if you don't, it will come get you. The realization will kick in and it will be unexpected and painful. It's much better that you confront these realities now when you still can. Because if people learn to apologize, if the Americans learn to stop waging war, and if we learn to apologize to the rest of the world, everything can change. Is that going to happen, though? I don't think so. I wish I could tell you things would be good. I left America, and I don't regret it at all. I will do everything in my power to never step foot in that country ever again. Because in doing so, you are, in fact, enabling a genocide. It sounds wrong. It's not fair, but it's true. And so know that anytime you hear bad things about the Russians or the Chinese, know that ultimately we are the ones who wage war on most of the known world. We are the ones who have overthrown many, many democratically elected governments. We are the ones who stage false flag attacks. And we are also the ones who assassinated our own president, Kennedy, whether it was a jilted ex-employee or it wasn't. We pivoted. We took the Castro assassination ring, which involved the mafia, it involved the CIA, it involved other people, Cuban like militias, right? We had this huge network all trying to assassinate Fidel Castro. And you can learn about this. You can learn all the methods. It's famous, right? He's supposedly the most assassination attempted man in the world. Why is that? Well, it's because we put a lot of effort into trying to assassinate him. So we built this engine of assassin, right? So then Kennedy comes along, pisses the wrong people off, and all we do is turn that engine at another man. And that's why you can find mafia people saying they were involved. That's why you can find Cubans saying they were involved. And that's why you can find ex-government employees saying they were involved. They're all right. It wasn't just one idea. He was going to die because we put our whole will to kill our own president. That is the reality, okay? And it wasn't just that. We went to war over Iran and Iraq for something we knew about and we chose not to prevent. Again, you may not believe me. I'm not saying we did 9/11. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we learned 9/11 was going to happen or something like that was going to happen. And we started shutting it down. And the people who were in charge of shutting that down, they were let go. They were stopped. And then the attack happens. Boom, it's used. Perfect excuse. Suddenly, the whole world is in support of the United States. The American people are behind the war. They want revenge. Right? You must know your history. Because if you don't, it's doomed to repeat itself. All right? Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see you some other day. You could comment on this video if you want, but I don't know if I'll be doing some Nicaragua videos. Maybe if I feel inspired, I'll do something. Maybe I'll rework this channel. I don't know. But either way, ciao. And I hope that you have a wonderful day. I know that this is heavy stuff, but trust me, the more you get on the same page about this now, the closer you can get to acceptance. And once you're there, you can start to actually be happy and understand that you cannot defend these things. That's what we must do. That's what we can do for the rest of the world. As Americans, we must stop defending the actions of our country. We aren't on the good side. We aren't on the right side of history. Okay? Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Bye.